Muy buena tarde a todos y a todas. En nombre de la Universidad Austral de Chile, específicamente de la Facultad de Ciencias Jurídicas y Sociales, les damos una cordial bienvenida y agradecemos su conexión a la primera parte de la transmisión del lanzamiento de la Red Chilena de Derecho Comparado. Les recordamos que este seminario está transmitido a través de la plataforma Zoom, también en Facebook, a través de la cuenta derecho.universidad austral de Chile, en Twitter y en YouTube lo pueden encontrar en las cuentas Derecho Watch. Quienes ven esta transmisión a través de Zoom pueden hacer llegar sus preguntas a través del icono Preguntas y Respuestas que está en la parte baja de su pantalla. Quienes lo ven a través de las redes sociales indicadas lo pueden hacer a través de los chats de dichas transmisiones. En primer lugar, ofrecerá un saludo inaugural el decano de la Facultad de Ciencias Jurídicas y Sociales de la Universidad Austral de Chile, doctor Juan Andrés Varas Brown.
Muchas gracias, Alejandra. Quiero saludar a todos y a todas muy cordialmente en nombre de la Facultad de Ciencias Jurídicas y Sociales de la Universidad Austral de Chile. Y comenzar unas breves palabras introductorias simplemente haciendo notar algo que es absolutamente obvio y cada vez más cotidiano. Vivimos en un mundo crecientemente democratizado, crecientemente globalizado y crecientemente además interconectado. Nunca en la historia de la humanidad había habido tantos miles de millones de personas regidos por sistemas democráticos y por estados democráticos de derecho en el mundo, como hoy día. Nunca habíamos tenido un mundo en el que la globalización fuera tan extremadamente poderosa y frecuente que nos parezca completamente normal encargar vía alguna plataforma informática alguna chuchería que necesitemos de China, sin ir más lejos. Y vivimos también, y probablemente el ejercicio que estamos haciendo ahora es la mejor demostración de esto en un mundo crecientemente conectado. Las redes sociales nos tienen permanentemente y de manera creciente pendientes de lo que ocurre en el otro extremo del mundo. Y esta confabulación de factores, democratización, globalización y conexión, ha ido produciendo fenómenos en el derecho que son dignos de destacar. En primer lugar, yo diría que hay una especie de exigencia de este mundo democrático, globalizado y conectado, por un creciente también abandono de lo que podríamos llamar una soberanía legislativa absoluta. Esta idea de que los estados reclaman para sí el 100% de la capacidad normativa, y en cambio esa idea ha sido progresivamente reemplazada por la idea de los límites a la soberanía, especialmente en el campo del derecho internacional de los derechos humanos. Por cierto que hay algunos retrocesos basados en precisamente las resistencias nacionalistas a esta idea, como el del reciente Brexit del Reino Unido de la Unión Europea. Pero yo diría que la tendencia es muy clara en ese sentido. Y este mundo nuevo exige también, en un plano ya distinto al de los derechos fundamentales, una creciente interacción entre los distintos sistemas jurídicos, y este es el punto en donde el derecho comparado, como esa herramienta intelectual que tienen los juristas para estudiar y enriquecer recíprocamente el conocimiento sistemático de instituciones alojadas en distintos sistemas jurídicos, pero que satisfacen propósitos de política legislativa que son equivalentes, resulta absolutamente indispensable. Entre otras cosas, para evitar esta tendencia que es tan frecuente, especialmente en países como los nuestros, de desarrollo incipiente, a creer que podemos inventar la rueda. Es por esto que yo quiero manifestar una profunda alegría por el lanzamiento hoy día en Chile del lanzamiento, de la red chilena de derecho comparado. En primer lugar, por contar con conferencias de profesores del nivel y del reconocimiento internacional de Hans Wolfgang Miklitz y de Rosalind Dixon. Hoy el primero, mañana la segunda. Es un privilegio contar con autores de esta talla en esta inauguración. En segundo lugar, quiero compartir mi alegría por la participación señalada, notable y significativa que han tenido en la gestación de la red y en la organización de este lanzamiento las profesoras María Paz Gatica y María Elisa Morales. Ellas dos representan en primer lugar a la Universidad Austral de Chile en esta red chilena de Derecho Comparado, representan un propósito que para mí es muy caro, muy cercano a mi corazón, que es establecer una vinculación estrechísima, en donde prácticamente no se sienta más diferencia que la geográfica entre los profesores de la universidad que están alojados geográficamente en Puerto Montt y los profesores de la universidad que están alojados geográficamente en Valdivia. Esta dupla, este tándem de Gatica Morales representa, creo yo, de manera inmejorable esa vinculación tan próxima. Representan además ellas dos el poderío creciente de las mujeres en el derecho. El hecho de que se trate de dos féminas destacadas en sus campos disciplinarios, creo que es muy digno de celebrar en estos tiempos. Y finalmente, ellas dos representan también la continuidad generacional en la iniciativa de generar propuestas consorciadas como esta de la Red Chilena de Derecho Internacional. Ellas dos representan la continuidad en la planta de nuestra ya no tan joven Facultad de Derecho, y para mí es una alegría que estén ambas dedicadas al derecho privado y desde allí al derecho comparado. Alegría, por lo tanto, bienvenidos todos y felicidades a los asistentes y a los panelistas que hoy día nos acompañan. Doy por inaugurado entonces este lanzamiento de manera formal. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, decano, por sus palabras. A continuación, dejo con ustedes a la presidenta de la Red Chilena de Derecho Comparado, quien también dará un saludo inaugural, María Jesús Iturria Benavente.
Muchas gracias. Muy buenas tardes a todos y a todas. Como presidenta de la Red Chilena de Derecho Comparado, quiero saludar muy especialmente a la profesora Alexandra Brown y a los profesores Paul Duplessis y Guido Rossi de la Universidad de Edimburgo, al profesor Stephen Wetherill de la Universidad de Oxford y a la profesora Lawrence Bourgeois Larsen y al profesor Xavier Philippe de la Universidad de la Sorbonne, que han reservado un espacio en sus ocupadas agendas para estar presentes en nuestro evento. Asimismo, quiero agradecer al profesor Hans Miklitz por amablemente aceptar nuestra invitación para compartir con nosotros algunas reflexiones sobre el derecho comparado. Es un honor para nosotros que nos acompañen en este día. Quiero agradecer también a la Universidad Austral de Chile, representada por el decano profesor Juan Andrés Varas, por aceptar ser la universidad anfitriona de nuestro evento de lanzamiento. En la misma línea, quiero agradecer a todos los funcionarios y académicos de la Universidad Austral que han hecho un trabajo brillante para que este evento se pueda realizar de acuerdo a los más altos estándares de calidad en tiempos difíciles como los que vivimos. La verdad es que me llena de orgullo poder decir que lo que hace algunos meses era solo un proyecto, poco a poco se ha transformado en una realidad. Comenzamos hace 6 semanas con el lanzamiento del blog chileno de Derecho Comparado, dirigido por el profesor Ernesto Vargas, que busca proveer de un espacio dinámico de discusión a quienes están interesados en el desarrollo, promoción y difusión del derecho comparado en Chile y el resto de América Latina. Hoy, con conferencias dictadas por 2 prestigiosos académicos, reconocidos mundialmente por sus contribuciones al derecho comparado, celebramos el lanzamiento oficial de nuestro proyecto. No puedo sino confiar que nos espera un futuro igual de auspicioso. En este sentido, compartiré con ustedes 2 importantes noticias. En primer lugar, con mucha alegría, les anuncio que en conjunto con la Universidad Adolfo Ibáñez y la Universidad Austral de Chile, organizaremos las primeras jornadas chilenas de Derecho Comparado. Están previstas tentativamente para el mes de abril del año 2022, en el campus de Viña del Mar de la Universidad Adolfo Ibáñez. Muchas gracias a estas universidades y a sus cuerpos académicos por hacerse parte de forma principal en este proyecto. En segundo lugar, siguiendo la línea de obras extranjeras como el Oxford Handbook of Comparative Law, estamos preparando un libro en español sobre cuestiones fundamentales de derecho comparado. Con esto, queremos poner a disposición del mundo hispanohablante las discusiones más relevantes en materia de derecho comparado que hasta el momento se encuentran disponibles principalmente en inglés, alemán, italiano y francés. Asimismo, pretendemos que en este libro haya especial consideración a fenómenos latinoamericanos, que muchas veces son excluidos o estudiados superficialmente por obras de este tipo. Así, esperamos que este trabajo se transforme en la obra de referencia de derecho comparado en Latinoamérica. Todo lo que hemos avanzado se ha logrado gracias a cada uno de los asociados que creyeron desde un comienzo en el proyecto, gracias a los asociados internacionales, gracias a los miembros del Consejo que generosamente han compartido sus experiencias, así como también gracias al incansable trabajo de la directiva. Todo mi reconocimiento entonces va también para María Paz Gatica, María Elisa Morales, Arantxa Gutiérrez, Jorge Barrera, Fo Beckman y Tomás de Rementería. Por último, quiero aprovechar la oportunidad para agradecer públicamente a los profesores Paul Duplessis y Guido Rossi y Alexandra Brown, todos de mi querida Universidad de Edimburgo, porque sin su guía y enseñanza este proyecto no existiría. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Presidenta, por sus palabras. Vamos a informarles que esta actividad se ha dividido en dos conferencias centrales, por así decirlo, una sobre derecho privado comparado y la otra sobre derecho público comparado. Iniciamos la jornada con la conferencia del profesor Hans Miklit sobre derecho privado comparado. Les recordamos que esta conferencia cuenta con traducción simultánea en la transmisión de Zoom. Para escucharla, deben pinchar en el botón Interpretación y seleccionar el idioma del cual desea escuchar la exposición. Moderan el panel las profesoras de la Universidad Austral de Chile, doctora María Elisa Morales y doctora María Paz Gatica. A continuación, entonces, las dejo a ustedes a cargo de la presentación.
Muchas gracias. Buenas tardes a todas y a todos. Para mí es un honor presentar el día de hoy a un connotado académico a quien personalmente admiro muchísimo, el profesor Hans W. Miklitz. El profesor Miklitz se especializa en Derecho Económico Europeo, Derecho Privado Europeo, Derecho al Consumo, Derecho Privado Comparado y Teoría del Derecho en relación a la justicia social. Ha sido profesor de Derecho Económico en el Centro Robert Schuman de Estudios Jurídicos Avanzados de la European University Institute. Desde que se incorporó a la European University Institute como profesor de Derecho en el año 2007, el profesor Miklitz se ha desempeñado como director de estudios de posgrado entre 2009 y 2012 y jefe del Departamento de Derecho desde el año 2012 al año 2014. Fuera de la European University Institute, el profesor Miklitz ha trabajado como director del Consejo Asesor del Instituto Max Planck, catedrático de Derecho Económico Europeo de la Cátedra Jean Monnet de las universidades de Bamberg y Erlangen, Alemania, y director del Instituto de Derecho Europeo del Consumo en la Universidad de Bamberg, Alemania. También ha sido reconocido con diversos premios, entre ellos una beca del European Research Council por su proyecto European Regulatory Private Law, que dirigió entre los años 2011 y 2016. El profesor Miklitz ha publicado prolíficamente a lo largo de su carrera en las revistas de derecho más prestigiosas del mundo, además de ser autor y editor de varios importantes libros. Algunas de sus obras más reconocidas son European Economic Law, junto con el profesor Stephen Wetherill, que nos acompaña hoy día, y que fue publicado por la editorial Ashgate. The Politics of Justice in EU Private Law, publicado por Cambridge University Press. Enforcement and Effectiveness of Consumer Law, de la serie Jus Comparatum, Global Studies in Comparative Law, de la editorial Springer. Y recientemente ha sido coautor del libro The Impact of the European Court of Justice on Neighboring Countries, publicado por Oxford University Press, este año 2020. Y coautor también de la obra New Private Law Theory, que se publicará el año 2021 por la editorial Cambridge University Press. Please, Professor Miklitz, the floor is yours. The audio, Professor.
Okay, good. Here I am. Thank you. So now you understand me, yeah? Okay. I'm sorry that I have to speak in Spanish, but be aware I can understand Spanish pretty well because I lived many years in Italy, and via the Italian, the Spanish language has become much more accessible to me. Okay, what I'm presenting here today has the tentative title, Comparative Law Between Theory and Practice, How to Bridge the Gap. The background to this question, you may find it in the book that Elisa just presented, The New Private Law Theory. So let me allow to do some advertising for the book, which will come out in the next couple of months. It's a long exercise and quite an ambitious book, some 500 pages on new private law theory, a pluralistic approach. Here, I would like to break down my presentation, which shall last roughly half an hour, I was told, into 5 points. My first point is I will speak about the post-World War II Eurocentrism. That means I will just roughly recall the functional method and the rise and decline in Europe. In the second step, I will then open up the debate to the transnational level, which in private law was triggered through financialization and globalization in between. And I will discuss a little bit legal origin theory. The third point will then be the internal critique from within private law, which has shattered the foundations on how to do comparative law considerably. The fourth is a more recent development, which could be could be summed up in the idea of a rehabilitation of the functional method in the recent literature. And last but not least, yes?
Professor Miglis, just 1 second. Could you please click on the English translation at the bottom of your screen? So I think at the bottom there should be a button that says translation.
It says, is it this one? English?
Yes, I think you have to press English.
Okay, I did it. Is it okay now?
Let me check. Ahora sí?
Shall I say something?
No, wait, just 1 second. I'm just checking with the translator that we're now on the correct channel.
I'm on the English channel now.
Yeah, I think that's where you're supposed to be. So let me just check 1 second. Technical issues, of course, as always. We are adding the layer of complexity with the translation on top of the networks and everything. Bien. Okay, I think we're fine now. Okay, good. Sorry for the interruption. It was just
but I will not repeat what I said so far.
No, just go on. It's
okay, good. So I think that was the right point. I was just on my way to explain how I will proceed. 5 points. The first one is what I call post-World War Eurocentrism, and we have to recall that in the 1940s and 50s and 60s, the world looked quite different. After the Second World War, Europe was about to re-establish and to get off the ground, and the project, which was initiated in particular by French and Italian politicians, was the building and the establishment of the European Union, what is called today the European Union, as you know. In the process of European integration, law played a key role. When you look into the Treaty of Rome or the ongoing treaties, you will not find much about private law, but the ideology or the understanding was that private law is the foundation on which the market freedoms and competition is built and the integration of the market. What you can find are first already after the Second World War, you may find important initiatives to use comparative law so as to establish a common set of basic principles. One of the most famous one is the Landau Group, which developed the principles of European contract law. And the method that was used, that is the well-established functional method by Ernst Rabel, René David, Konrad Zweigert, and Hein Kötz. I think these books have all been translated into English and hopefully also into Spanish. So the functional method is based on a two-step procedure that I will recall to do justice to what it really means, because quite often it is reduced in its understanding. So the first point is whether the rule in question has proved satisfactory in its country of origin, and secondly, whether the rule will work in the country of origin. Yeah. So whenever you discuss comparative law, and what Ole Landau did was exactly trying to apply this method, looking for the best mechanism in the country of origin and testing it in the recipient country. So the same functional method in the high days, so to say, of this traditional approach then led to the study and acquis group and to the development of the so-called academic draft common frame of reference that has also been translated into various languages. Here it combines the study group, which was then led by Christian von Bahr, and the acquis group, which was discussing and analyzing the European law. Both together were merged, both findings in the draft common frame of reference, which is in essence, I think, the functional method in action, so to say. The same approach, which crystallizes in these two huge projects, is also more or less the basis of the different harmonization processes in private law that the European Union initiated, in particular from the 1986 onwards, after the adoption of the Single European Act, which paved the way for majority voting and which really boosted the development of harmonized private law, mainly contract law, as you all know. So what you can see in Europe is the phenomenon that private law, or the development of European private law, is closely related to an integration process, economic, political integration, and the method applied is the functional method. Implicit to this idea is a much deeper understanding, which has been spelled out and by Franz Viaker, a legal historian who coined the language of the common European legal culture. And this common European legal culture is in a way the foundation on which this functional method is based. Means there is an element of commonality, not only in continental Europe, but if we follow Reinhard Zimmermann, also in the common law systems, that goes back to Roman law, and that allows to build based on Roman law and on the major features of the common European legal culture to build the European private law. So just to recall, Viaker had three parameters that he exercised and that he developed in his long, amazing book on the history of European private law. So the first is personalism, the second is intellectualism, and the third is legalism. I will not go into details here. What is important is the ideology, so to say, which is behind the common culture. It means that a legal transfer from one country within the EU to another country is possible. And that is when you go into the documents which prepared the adoption of all the directives on unfair terms or unfair commercial practice, consumer credit, whatever you want, is based on comparative research, on functional methods, on the search for the best solution. These were the high days. Let me come now to the decline. The decline starts more or less with the beginning of the millennium, of the new millennium, and it can be caught in a very topical language, no longer integration through law, but integration without law or integration beyond law. So what happened? In the year 2000 for the EU is quite an important benchmark because there is, first of all, the famous Lisbon Summit in 2000, which is a policy document of the head of the states, but highly influential because it coined the language of turning the EU in the most competitive legal order, the most competitive economy of the world. So that was a shift in policy towards economic efficiency. We will certainly discuss this much deeper. And the second step was that was in 2001, the white paper on governance, which in a way introduced politics into the integration process and all these mechanisms that you are familiar with, I'm sure, like the open method of coordination. So means policy mechanisms outside harmonization, hardcore harmonization of the legal system, so as to back up and complement the process of European integration. The last one is the Charter on Fundamental Rights that was equally adopted in 2000 and later on then turned into, as you know, in the Lisbon Treaty, became integrated into the Constitution. So what is important here is and why I'm thinking the year 2000 is the benchmark that changed the policy, is what happened after 2000 is that the EU is no longer the European Commission when preparing regulatory activities, is no longer seriously relying on comparative law. When you look into the more recent documents, like the reform of the consumer law, which was a big issue that was completed more or less in 2019, there were thousands of pages produced in order to prepare legislative action, but comparative law was, in comparison to the 1990s or 1980s, no longer visible. What was really the benchmark was economic efficiency. So to conclude this first phase, perhaps with the famous article of Pierre Legrand, who argued strongly against Villaka, that legal cultures are not converging. Yeah, I think you are familiar with this. You know this very provocative language Also, his article on the so-called Anti-von Baer Code has become quite famous. So that means today, if we look today in the EU, the role of comparative law is relatively shaky, at least in the political process at the European Union, where it had gained such a prominent position in the decades before. Let me turn to the second stage. More or less, it started gradually with the fall of Berlin Wall, as you know, so with the collapse of communism, which paved the way for a totally different world order. Remember the revision of GATT, the adoption of WTO. So that was a period of big change and of what is roughly termed globalization. But let us also not forget financialization. So the uncoupling of finance from the market of goods and services with far-reaching impacts also on the legal system, because when you look into where the music is playing in innovative and innovation, in legal innovation, you have today look into finance in order to understand what's going on. So the major development that occurred in the financialization and globalization story is what could be termed the transnationalization of comparative law. That means after, in the 1990s already, development gained pace to look not only into the clash between communism and capitalism, between the West and the East, but to look beyond, to look into the world on the one hand, but also to look into the clash between different economic models within the capitalism. So the book of Hall and Soskice of the varieties of capitalism has become famous, but I am here in the comparative law context more interested in the legal origin theory. So the legal origin theory, to put it provocatively, took the legal families approach seriously and argued there is a difference between the common law system and the continental legal system. So the common law system here included the United States. So in essence, the legal origins theory, at least initially, was a comparison between the United States on the one hand, the UK included as a common law country, and Ireland, and then on the other hand, continental Europe. The development in legal origin theory started in finance, in corporate law. It did not enter the field of contract law so easily, but it gained ground, as you may easily find out in the literature. So what they did, what legal origins did, was really to build on the findings of comparative law and on the two major legal families, common law and continental law. And in order to, and that is very different from the functional method, what they did is to use empirical statistical methods in order to find criteria that could catch the differences in the legal systems. Yeah, so that was one major element, very different from the functional method. And the second one is the how the different countries performed economically. I think a quite famous document in which these conflict or the findings of legal origin theory is condensed is the famous report on doing business, in which the official policy at the international level turned into a language where the common law is superior to the continental legal system and to codified legal systems, because the common law is more open, is less intrusive than the continental law, and gives more freedom to the economic actors. I'm here deliberately crude, but for the sake of the argument, you may pardon this message. What is important is that the legal origin theory caught the representatives of traditional functional comparative law red-handed. That was the language which was used by Jaco Husser, red-handed. So off guard. That means the traditional functional method felt safe in its environment, in its intellectual network, and was shattered by the use or the misuse of the legal family's approach by legal origins. So, nevertheless, despite the differences in methods that I explained, there is an interesting similarity between the functional method and legal origins, and that can be linked to the understanding of law as a product. Yeah? You may be familiar with Roberta Romano, who and her analysis of corporate law in the United States, and the famous Delaware effect, that the country with the less and the most liberal legislation is providing incentives for companies to move their business seat to Delaware. That is, I think, rather well known. What is interesting is the language of law as a product, yeah, because the law is not really analyzed in detail, or is not understood as having a self-standing value in itself, but it's a tool, a mechanism through which particular objectives can be achieved, and here reducing costs and providing favorable environment to the business. And there is some similarity to the functional method, because also the functional method in the European integration in particular is a tool. It's just an instrument, and you may find this in extensive discussions in Europe on the instrumentalization of the law, yeah, in particular of private law, which is submitted in the EU also to the market rationale, to the integration of markets at a certain level of protection. Nevertheless, the law is instrumentalized to an extent that has raised concern in the intellectual environment. So, but Lott did not stop here, and I will not go deeper into Romano, and I will not go into the development in the EU, because what's interesting is that Lott developed and was more or less replaced by the concept of regulatory competition. And regulatory competition then opened up a new pathway towards transnational law. So regulatory competition no longer between the US and the EU, or in the language of varieties of capitalism, between liberal market economies and coordinated market economies, but regulatory competition between different regions, between different settings of transnational law, even between transnational law and non-law, Yeah, so that was brought in through the discourse of transnational law, private regulation, as it could be called also. But this opening complicated, as we all know, tremendously the use of comparative law, because in Europe already it was complicated to use comparative law and compare 28 legal orders, yeah, or 27. So when I was a student, and I studied and I completed my studies in Hamburg, and I was close to the Max Planck Institute in Hamburg, where I worked a little bit. I had a little contract there when I was a student. And it was clear, it was the implicit message that when you study comparative law, you need to know the language of the country that you want to compare. And not only to know the language, but the best was to have spent at least a year in that country in order to understand not only the legal system, but the cultural environment in which you are living. So imagine what it means for the EU with 28 legal orders and 25 languages or so. And imagine what it means when it comes to transnational law, where we have so many languages that English is the common denominator for us. So just as today, I'm not speaking in Spanish, I'm speaking in English, but English is not my language. I'm not native English. So the transnational legal dimension complicated the use of this idea. You compare legal orders and you find out what is the best rule in the country of origin and how it could potentially be applied and adapted to the country, to the recipient country. This model more or less faded away already in an enlarged Europe, but even more so in the transnational environment. So there is there was some critique raised against legal origin theory that I would like to mention at least. I will not focus on the internal critique, so to say, how to better apply, how to better develop the parameters, the method, and so on. Here, the legal origin theory has made huge progress and also far beyond the US and the EU. It can be applied in whatever fields throughout the world, and you may find publications that are doing exactly this. The only, I think the more interesting aspect, and that links back to what was happening in the EU after 2000, is the question raised and the critique raised against legal origin theory that the way they are using law is a very debatable one. So there's quite some writings from Matthias Siems and others on the thin version of law, or the very thin understanding that legal origin theory is applying. And in a way, this is paradigmatic for what was happening in the EU and what is also happening in the international environment. So where we are standing today has been nicely put by Ralf Michaels, who is now the director of the Max Planck Institute in Hamburg. He argues that the law as a product is a misnomer, and in the transnational environment, and in particular in light of the high key role economics are playing, law has been commodified, which brings us to Polanyi, and which links which could also be easily linked to comparative law that is promoting legal transfer. So the law is commodified. My next step is a more recent development that is, no, sorry, I wanted to first stress a little bit that there is more on critique within comparative law. That is a long-standing critique, but this critique has gained ground through the transnationalization development, but also in Europe through the decline of the functional method in light of the integration without law or beyond law, as I said. And there are different strands of developments that are coming together in the internal critique of comparative law. The first and one of the most outspoken voices in the critique of how the comparative law and the functional method has been used has been raised by Günter Frankenberg, who attacks who has attacked the use of the functional method in Europe and the Eurocentrism as just promoting Western capitalist economies. Yeah, so there is what Günter Frankenberg is doing is bringing the political economy into the debate on how comparative law can be used. And this certainly links very well to the opening of comparative law beyond Europe into the transnational environment. There is similar critique, although the language that Thomas Duve is using is different, but I'm sure Thomas Duve is well known to you as he has lived so many years in Argentina and has published widely in Spanish. So the same critique here, but with a different connotation, in particular when it comes to the colonies, that it's not the right way to just look into how EU was exported, EU law or common law or French law or Spanish law was exported to the rest of the world in the colonies, but also to look into how this colonial law was applied and whether there is a backflow towards the mother countries, so to say. So that is one strand of critique with huge implications that challenges the political program behind this Eurocentrist history of comparative law, in particular in the design of the functional method. But that's not all. There is also a strong critique that focuses on legal transplants, and that is discussing the conditionality of legal transplants, means the conditions under which it is possible at all to transfer legal rules from one economic, social, political setting to another one. So there are key figures that are involved in the debate, like Watson, who is asking whether law can be transplanted, and if so, to what extent. We have Gunther Teubner with his well-known article on irritation, on legal transplants as irritations. We have Hans Lindahl, who has also a strong South American background, one of the most prominent legal philosophers, discussing illegality, so that the implementation or the integration of a foreign law into an existing, very heterogeneous social and political environment where indigenous people have a role to play, like in many parts of South America. This legal transplant leads to distortions and to what he calls illegality. There is, last but not least, there is the debate on interlegality as a new form of interaction between different legal systems that is promoted by legal transplants. And again, you can study the EU wonderfully, because you have interlegality between the European Union law on the one side and the way it was transposed and implemented in the 28 member states. So you have an interlegality between the European legal system and the national harmonized legal system, which is subject to an ever-growing debate. Last but not least, you have the question, again, international, theoretical, philosophical question, whether a legal transplant endangers the identity of a legal system. So that means we have it even in the European Constitution, as you know, the identity clause. What does it mean? What does it, is private law part of the identity of Chile, for instance, or not? So all these points are high-level theoretical issues brought from within, and they all are directed in a way against the functional method, against these rather technical search for the best solution. The last move so far in the critique from within is very much a move towards methodology. So there is an ongoing debate, a middle way, to seek a middle way, to find a way out of these, let's say, the basics of the functional method as it was applied in the second half of the 20th century. And it is still certainly applied in the day-to-day practice of politicians around the world and of legal scholars around the world. And on the other hand, these high-flying, very challenging ideas on comparative law and on the policy and the possibilities to compare legal systems at all, and let alone to discuss legal transplants within the legal systems. So the current debate, as I said, is focusing on how is there a compromise? That is my fourth point and my fifth point, so to say. Is there compromise? Is there a middle way between critical theories on comparative law on the one hand, and these very down-to-earth, very technical comparative law exercise that we are all familiar with? And the formula that has been brought up is the comparative law in context. That is the idea. So that means the combination of the functional method with a particular context, a socio-economic, political context in which the rules and the debates have to be embedded. So it is more or less here where we are standing, and I'm coming to the end of my talk. And I would like to refer to a book that Ari Reich and myself have just published on the impact of the European Court of Justice on neighboring countries, where we analyzed the eastern countries, so to say, Turkey, Russia, Ukraine, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, but also then Israel, Jordan, and Tunisia. And we wanted to know what is the impact of the European Court of Justice. And what we did in the end was we asked our reporters not only to write a common framework that explains the socioeconomic and the political environment in which the legal orders are built, but then to count and to find out the references in their national courts to the ECJ and where they were used and in which context, and to explain the reasons why. So that is a more recent attempt where, let's say, Ari and I tried to apply this comparative law in context approach, which is certainly not sufficient, but which is also far away and very different from the functional method that you can find in so many publications. So let me stop here. I'm a bit over time, but not too much. I'm keen to listen to the questions that you have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Meklitz. We actually have received some interesting questions. I would like to clarify first, because we are receiving questions via different networks. So, and some of we are, I am just filtering a bit the questions, because some of the questions are not directly related to your talk. So we're going to just keep the ones that are directly related to your talk. So first, we have a question from Arantxa Gutierrez, and her question says, the view of law as a product implies that it is consciously used as a tool to achieve certain effects. But we all know that sometimes there are degrees of path dependency, and the way we use legal terms actually shapes the very way we think about the law. Do you think that this oversimplistic view can be avoided using a structural comparison, maybe? Do you think that the debates concerning legal taxonomy can be of any value to this?
Shall I answer one by one, or do you want me to answer a couple of questions?
I will give you another one. Yeah, okay. Let's just do two questions, answers, and then we go to another two. So there's another question by Tomás de Rementeria. He's asking about your opinion on neocolonialism that is implicit in private law harmonization or uniformization, in particular in matters of international investments or arbitration, and especially in relation to third world countries. I will leave you to address those two.
So the law as a product, this concept, as I try to explain, works only if you have one parameter that you use. This parameter is economic efficiency. Yeah. When you deviate from this paradigm and you go into the institutional dimension or the structural dimension of private law, then you are at least at the level of varieties of capitalism, means where you have to define and to compare different legal orders. And this is also, in a way, what many of those who subscribe to varieties of capitalism and also to legal origin theory are trying to do. That means to develop a more sophisticated taxonomy that allows to include other parameters than just those that are focusing on what is the best and the cheapest way for companies. On neocolonialism and the international investment, this is one of the fields where I think the critique from Günther Frankenberg and others is exactly focusing on. That is definitely a way of, if you want to use that language, neocolonialism. It's I think without any doubt. And here you may raise the question how to circumvent this and how to overcome this.
Thank you, Professor. We're going to continue. The questions are flowing in as you speak. So the next one is by Stephen Weather, and he's asking, EU law is strongly influenced by the aim of market integration. Does this limit its exportability to other jurisdictions which do not have this aim? Is that especially true of EU private law? That's one question. And then we have another question by our president, Maria Jesus Iturria. And she's asking, what can we rescue from traditional functionalism? So I'll leave you with those two for the moment.
Yeah. Hi, Steve. I cannot see you, but I'm happy that you take the time to listen to my talk. A very ambitious question. And the answer would be worth a lecture. Let me focus my answer on what we try to discuss, Ari and myself, in the book. So market integration is exactly what the EU is trying to export to its neighboring countries. Yeah? The market freedoms, competition law are enshrined in bilateral agreements, and also something that is possible, that can be traced in the citations of the courts of the neighboring countries. I think there is a link between market integration and private law, and that is in the best sense. It can be linked to competition, and it can be linked, as we all know, that the historically the Sherman Act, but also the competition laws in the member states are to some extent in the EU, to some extent connected to the idea of that there is a democracy. Yeah, so I think what market integration can do in the best of all worlds, maybe to promote these ideas of a democracy outside its own territory. It certainly limits the market integration, certainly limits the export, and that can easily be shown. And again, we studied in the book that the social integration means all the values to which the EU subscribes, and also the social regulation in private law, in labor law, in contract law, in consumer law, is not playing really an important role, neither in the bilateral agreements that the EU has concluded with these countries, nor can there be any traces found in the case law of neighboring courts. So the short answer is, in practice, yes, there is a limitation, but in theory, it would be possible for the EU to go beyond. And what can be rescued? I think I've not spoken in my talk about the impact of legal tech and of digitization on the legal system. Let me give you an easy example. So in Europe, we had, and Europe in the US, I don't know to what extent that was the case also in South America, we had the Dieselgate, yeah, the Dieselgate story. So if we look into how the Dieselgate was dealt with in the EU, just for the sake of the argument, what do we find? We find that there is a common problem, which is more or less the same in the whole EU and in the US, but the legal systems answers differ considerably. Yeah, they differ in the field of law, where the solution has been looked for. It deviates in outcome, who is compensated. It deviates whether there is an individual or collective action and what the key players are. So on the one hand, it is certainly useful here to look into and to use functional methods and to use this old tradition, to save it and to apply it. On the other hand, my example demonstrates the complexity that we have to face when doing this. So the functional method, in light of comparative law in context, in light of the theoretical critique that has been raised from all sides, including the neo-colonial one, reduces what is possible within the functional method, just because of the legal complexity. That is unfortunately how I see it.
Okay.
And maybe I can add, we should also use legal tech and digitization in order to reduce legal complexity, and at least think about it, to what extent it can help us.
So we have still more questions. Now I'm going to have to apologize because the names of the people that are asking the questions, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to say. But the first one is by Laurence Burgorg Larsen. I'm really sorry for that. And also I'm translating here because she asked in Spanish, so I'm hoping that I'm translating correctly. What is your opinion on Hungary and Poland's use of constitutional pluralism theories within the realm of the European Union, where the concept of identity is key, to ultimately reject the application of the Union's common law, the values of which are essential? And she mentions Article 2 of the European Union treaties, where the rule of law is mentioned.
Okay, and another one?
And another one by Christine Weidenslaufer. The professor mentioned the problem of legal transplants between different socioeconomic contexts. What practical tools do comparative law experts have to model their work in this sense? And she mentions dangers of the comparing constitutions with no context. Those two.
Okay.
We can tackle.
I think we cannot have a debate on Hungary and Poland here and their role within the EU and the extent to which they abide by the rule of law. We will have, in the next couple of weeks, I was told, a judgment of the European Court of Justice, which will have to deal with this question. So I will focus on identity. I think identity is a very Janus-faced concept. Yeah. So it's like nationalism. Yeah. So both are neither per se good nor per se bad. Yeah, but they can easily be misused for whatever purpose. Yeah, for protectionism, for economic protectionism, but also for that is what we are seeing in Hungary and in Poland for shielding the country against the intrusion of the inflow of ideas that are coming from the European Union on democracy, on the rule of law, as we say. So identity is an extremely tricky concept, and we cannot use it without without context and without thinking it through. Transplants. I think the answer that we are working on, or that comparative lawyers are working on, is exactly what I said is the context. When you look into legal origins, or on Katharina Pistor and Simon Deakin in their book, or when you look into what comparative lawyers are writing on the methodology to be applied. There's a long list of books that has been published in the last couple of years. These are all, they all contain proposals on the methodology that can be applied. And I think it would be a lecture in itself to discuss the methodologies that are proposed in comparative law currently, but it all boils down to the need that we, as comparative lawyers, have to face an ever more challenging task. That means we have to, when we do it seriously, we have to be cautious. We have to take into account the historical, the political, the economic, and the social implications of a transplant. And that is not an easy question to answer, even in a very narrow context of a particular remedy in private law. Yeah. So if you take the right of withdrawal, just to give you one example, and which is a nice mechanism working in a well-functioning economy, whether it works in a country like Georgia, where you have a black economy, which is crucial for the majority of the people, and only a limited white economy, so to say, where these nice rules apply. That is exactly the context to study.
Right, so we have a short reply from Christine Weidenslaufer. She says, at the Library of Congress, we are developing an online tool to compare constitutions with incorporated socioeconomic variables. So that's her comment. So we have the last two questions.
Yeah, let me perhaps
Go.
I will answer to this.
Yes, okay.
On the variables. I think we should be aware of the fact that when we introduce variables or parameters or into the legal system to assess particular values, like the rule of law, like justice, like human rights, we are changing the substance of the values. Yeah, I think there is no innocence in breaking down the degree to which a country is democratic into variables and then rank them without transforming the values from which these parameters are derived. Yeah.
Right, so we have the last two questions. One is by Maria Besomi. She's an associate of our network. And the last one is by myself. Maria's question is, do you think that functionalism is necessarily linked to a universalist project or to a harmonization project?
in a historical perspective, certainly it was in the case of Europe, but I am interested on whether there is a conceptual space for the functional method to work without or irrespective of a universalist agenda, which I agree has tended to be Eurocentrist and which is the focus of Frankenberg's and Legrand's criticisms. To sum up, do you think it is plausible to think in functionalism detached from its original project? And the last one, I'm going to save the last one, so I'm going to let you answer this, and then I'm going to ask my last question.
Okay. I think we have to be clear here and distinguish between instrumentalism and functionalism, which are often used as synonyms, which is dangerous. Yeah. When it comes to functionalism, the question is, so what exactly is the function that the law should play in a particular context? And the answer certainly must not be a universal one. Yeah, I think if you put it this way, then there is room for deviating answers, and we have it in the overall debate on legal pluralism. Yeah, and but again, I think that is a huge field on which I did not really touch upon, but which is crucial for comparative law. But the short answer would be again to ask what is the function of comparative law or of law in this particular exercise? I think that is the first question to study before we seek an answer.
Thanks. So to conclude this first session of our launch event, I would just like to ask you, this is more like a personal matter. I would just like to ask you for advice for our network and for us young comparative or aspiring comparative lawyers for the future, and especially if you have any insights about our specific legal context, which is Latin America. It's a tricky one.
Look, no, I think it's a fair one. It's a tricky one, but it's a fair question. I think there's still room for comparative law, there is no doubt, yeah? But the innocence is over, yeah? There is no, you cannot do comparative law today in 2020 as you could do it in 1970, 50 years ago, yeah, in a particular context, yeah, and be it just in South America between two countries, yeah, neighboring countries, the countries that are surrounding Chile, and then looking for a comparison. This is over, yeah. I think there is a need there is a crucial need to engage in legal origins, yeah, in varieties of capitalism, in the more theoretical, philosophical debate of legal transplants, yeah. I think these kind of tools are necessary in order to constantly self-reflect. What are you doing when you do comparison in whatever field? Yeah. Let me be even more concrete. So this book that Ari and Reich edited inspired us to ask further questions and to dream of further projects. Yeah. For instance, the impact of the European Court of Justice on South American private law orders. Yeah. So if this is the research question, how how to design a study, yeah? How to develop a methodology that you as a young researcher can defend in whatever environment without being immediately attacked by whomever I don't know, to be naive or yeah, to be apolitical, whatever. And I think what is the positive side of this blossoming debate on comparative law in the last 20 years, roughly, mainly in the last 20 years, a huge development in comparative law, is really that there are many ideas and proposals on the table that allows us to draft a research project which allows to study the impact of the European Court of Justice on South American private law orders. Yeah, so I would not be pessimistic. I would just say there is an element of modesty needed. Yeah, or you know, the risk is, and that shines through many of the questions, if we use all these new tools, yeah, the parameters, the variables that have been developed first by Lott and now gain ground in human rights, for instance, yeah? Human rights indicators is another story, or constitutional law. It's not so much my field, but I know it a little bit at least. So that is for me a very problematic path for the law, for the integrity of the law, for what remains of the law if we turn it into just yeah, an indicator, a variable. Yeah, so then we are. I found Dworkin here very helpful. Yeah, talking about the integrity of the law.
Professor Miklitz, we could not be more thankful for your presence today. We are very honored that we were able to share with you these ideas, mostly to hear your ideas than sharing ours.
They were great questions. Sorry, great questions.
Okay. So right now we are gonna finish our session. I hope that we can keep in touch for the future and you can continue to give us advice on these matters. And so
you should write to me.
Okay, I will definitely. So now I'm gonna return the floor to our ceremony master. I don't know how to say that in English. In Spanish is maestro de ceremonias, but well.
Yeah, the master of the ceremony. Yeah,
the master of the ceremony, yes, Alejandra.
At least I understand what you mean.
Good. Thank you, Professor Miklitz.
Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias por esta primera presentación que hemos tenido en este lanzamiento de la Red Chilena de Derecho Comparado. Agradecemos inmensamente al profesor Miklitz por su conexión, por su conferencia, y a las profesoras María Elisa Morales y María Paz Gatica. A continuación, la directora del área de Derecho Privado de la Red Chilena de Derecho Comparado, Arantxa Gutiérrez, ofrecerá unas palabras de cierre de esta primera parte de la jornada.
Para finalizar esta primera sesión de lanzamiento de la Red Chilena de Derecho Comparado, quisiera agradecer tanto a las personas que se han asociado formalmente a la red debido a su interés académico en esta disciplina, como también así a todos quienes ejercen la profesión y tienen una genuina curiosidad en aprender más y acercarse a este abanico de formas de estudiar soluciones jurídicas que se dan en otros ordenamientos a problemas prácticos similares. En este sentido, la gran charla inaugural que dictó el profesor Miklitz acerca de las aplicaciones en derecho privado de los estudios comparados, nos proporciona una visión de los desafíos y también de las potencialidades de fortalecer este conjunto de técnicas de investigación en el medio chileno. A través de las diversas iniciativas que contemplamos desarrollar dentro del futuro próximo, tales como el blog de la red, como la elaboración de una obra colectiva que aborde de manera integral y en español un gran abanico de temas jurídicos, así como la realización de las primeras jornadas de derecho comparado. Con todo ello, queremos acercar una visión actualizada y crítica de los grandes temas actualmente discutidos en derecho comparado. Con todo esto, con la convicción de que el trabajo colectivo nos permitirá dar un salto en la expansión y familiaridad tanto de estudiantes y académicos como profesionales del derecho en el uso de esta serie de herramientas y métodos comparativos. Como que quedó claro de la exposición anterior, el quehacer de un comparatista no se trata de efectuar juicios de valor simplistas en términos de la solución jurídica del país X es mejor o peor que la del país Z, sino más bien proporciona herramientas críticas que nos permiten reflexionar y hacer un juicio crítico de la posición del propio ordenamiento jurídico. Y en ese sentido, creo que una de las cosas más interesantes que podemos aprender como comparatistas es que existen otras maneras perfectamente razonables de hacer las cosas, y a pesar de que a veces hay instituciones jurídicas que nos pueden parecer monolíticas o con una inercia tremenda o casi incambiables, o nos parecen la forma de solucionar un problema jurídicamente, aquí es cuando los estudios comparados nos permiten plantear si acaso nos estamos naturalizando o estamos inculturados en ver una solución como la solución. Y yo creo que la belleza del derecho comparado está precisamente en que nos ayuda a explorar críticamente otras posibilidades. Así que para finalizar, agradecemos muy sinceramente la gran cantidad de estudiantes, de académicos y profesionales desde Chile y el extranjero que nos han acompañado hoy en la sesión de Derecho Privado, y los invitamos a mantenerse informados e involucrados en las iniciativas futuras de esta naciente red chilena de Derecho Comparado. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias a usted por estas palabras de cierre e invitación a seguir conectados en una red que recién nace, que se estructura, que pero sabemos tendrá una utilidad inmensa para los investigadores, para los doctorandos, tanto nacionales como quizás internacionales. En nombre de la Facultad de Ciencias Jurídicas y Sociales de la Universidad Austral de Chile, agradecemos su asistencia a esta primera parte del lanzamiento de la Red Chilena de Derecho Comparado. Les invitamos a conectarse a las 19 horas de hoy, a la segunda parte, cuando tendremos la conferencia de la profesora Rosalind Dixon. Desde las 19 horas, quienes deseen conectarse en Zoom lo pueden hacer utilizando el mismo link o enlace de conexión que usaron para esta primera parte. Les agradecemos a todos y a todas que tengan una muy